welcome to Authors at Wharton.
A pleasure to be here.
You should reserve that judgment until the end of today.
We'll be fine. I think we're going to be fine. So is this place full? That's great.
It looks like
That's great. It's huge.
So I should introduce you. I think everyone in the audience already knows who Michael Lewis is, but he wrote some decent books like Moneyball and The Blind Side and The Big Short and Liar's Poker, and the list goes on and on and on, and occasionally they get made into movies, and people seem to like them. So Michael, it's an honor to have you here.
Well, I'm not going to say what I would normally say. We'll see in an hour. We'll see if it was a pleasure to be here.
Good. Good. We will find out. So I want to start by talking about the Undoing Project, which really begins with Moneyball.
Yeah.
I imagine that your life has been a little unpleasant for the last decade plus, because everything is now Moneyball. But pick up where that left off and tell us where this book came from.
So when it first occurred to me I was going to write a book about sports, about when I was going to write Moneyball, I submitted it to my publisher as two books. I said, I'm going to write this first book that's called Moneyball, so I can write this second book called Underdogs. And Underdogs was going to be about following the kids that the Oakland A's drafted in 2002, using an algorithm as opposed to their scout's judgment, and tracing what happened to the ideas that the Oakland A's were working with. And I spent a couple of years working on that, and the Moneyball, the noise after the book, after Moneyball, just kind of killed my ability to have the material to myself. I thought I was going to have it to myself, so I abandoned that project. And about the time I abandoned that project, I saw this review of Moneyball by a pair of academics, Richard Thaler, an economist, and Cass Sunstein, who's a legal scholar. And they said, like the story that Mr. Lewis has told is interesting, but he doesn't seem to realize where it comes from. And the point they made was, like, Moneyball was really, it was about baseball, but it really wasn't about baseball in my mind. What interested me wasn't the baseball part, or not entirely. What interested me was that markets misvalued people. And so much that the teams were able to come in and finding new and better ways to value baseball players, find bargains, find people whose talents were appreciated, and at the same time find players who were way overvalued, and essentially operate like a financial trader in the market for players with better information. And the review said, they weren't as mean as this, but they could have been. And they said, he never asks why this happens. Why do markets do this? And they do this because of at least in part, because of the cognitive biases of the experts who are determining the value of the players, the baseball scouts. And there are these two Israeli psychologists, Kahneman and Amos, who explore these biases. So you can actually get to the root of the story through their work. And I thought, I was kind of amazed I missed the story, and I realized instantly that I missed the story because I had not picked up on a thread inside the Oakland office of deep interest in behavioral economics, which was the transmission mechanism of Danny and Amos's ideas into the real world, or one of them anyway. And Paul DePodesta, the Jonah Hill character in the Moneyball movie, was very, very interested in cognitive biases, and he was interested because he'd studied on his own behavioral economics. So anyway, so I live in Berkeley, and at some point, one of my best friends in Berkeley, a psychologist named Dr. Keltner, and I were out to drinks, and I said, there are these guys in your field who apparently had a lot to say about this book, and who are they? Because I didn't know who they were. And he said, Danny won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he lives up the hill. Amos is dead, but I was Amos's TA, he said. And so I went and met Danny, and not without any kind of agenda. I didn't think book. I thought I missed some part of the story, and I was just curious what he had to say about it. And I also thought it was kind of cool to meet someone who won a Nobel Prize. And he and I started a friendship. We go for long walks in the hills. He was working on his book, was called Thinking Fast and Slow. And every time I go up, he'd be in a state of despair and say, this thing is so awful, it's going to destroy my reputation, I can't publish it. And I'd say, let me look at some of it. And I read it, and it was great. And I said, publish it. It's great. This is crazy. But this is who he is. He's just like constantly turning on his own ideas. And and then the last gasp was he gave someone $5,000 to go give the money to other people to anonymously trash his book so that he would be dissuaded from publishing. That's how neurotic it all got. The talks between us eventually they always circled around his relationship with Amos. And these guys had spawned these ideas. They'd created a field of judgment decision making. They'd attacked head on kind of how people evaluate probabilities instead of using statistics. What was going on in the mind when people made what should be probabilistic calculations, when they made judgments and decisions. And that was interesting to me, but his relationship with Amos was what interested me the most, because it isn't an exaggeration to call it a love story. They were not sexually involved, because they were both very straight men, but their relationship was more intense with each other than with anyone else they had anything to do with. As Danny once put it to me, he said, you fall in love with women and so on and so forth, but with Amos, I was rapt. And he said he loved me more than I loved him. And I'm not sure that's true, but it was important for him to think that. And the relationship had the arc of a love story. They met in a blaze of sparks, fell in love with each other's minds, spent 10 years creating children, the ideas, and then had this horrible falling out that nobody knew about. And I had access to that because I had access to the other side of the story, which shocked me, but turned out, I taught for a year at a writing course at Cal, and just about my favorite student was a kid named Tversky, and we'd struck up a friendship outside of the class, and I'd see him for dinner every now and then. He turned out to be Amos's oldest son, and it wouldn't have occurred to me to ask him, what's because I've never heard of Amos Tversky, but Orrin, because we had a prior relationship, got his mother to basically open up Amos to me. I mean, Amos Tversky was a legend in his time. He has a kind of secular saint quality to him. Any object he touched seems to have been preserved, and people kind of keep it. And among these objects are the file cabinets with all his old files and letters in them, and they are still in the hallway outside the Stanford offices that he occupied 20 years ago. And nobody gone in them. And Barbara opened them up to me, and in there were the love letters between him and Danny. In there were notes for conversations with Danny. In there was an awful lot of stuff. So I know I'm going on a long time, but I'm saving you a lot of trouble.
Thank you.
But I became entranced by the idea of getting their ideas across by telling the story of their relationship, and it took a long time. I realized it was a book first, pretty quickly. I realized it was a book, but then it took me a while to realize it was a book I could write, because I didn't know anything about psychology, and I didn't know anything about Israel, or not much. And I'm a goy, and I knew that I was going to have to. I knew that this whole relationship took place against the backdrop of the birth of the Israeli state. These two guys were on and off the battlefield for the first 20 years of their grown-up life. Danny had reshaped the Israeli military in a very Moneyball way. Amos was he was a Spartan warrior. Danny was a Holocaust survivor. What I was walking into was a very Jewish subject. And I felt I had to earn the right to tell the story. So I made 4 trips to Israel. Each was at least a week long, and one was 2 weeks long, before I even decided to do the book. And going and seeing what was left of their lives, old people who knew them, and so on and so forth. And it took, by 5 years into it, I thought, I could kind of do this. And then it was a matter of persuading Danny to just go let me do it. And I pulled the trigger on it a few years ago. And everybody's been kind of great. They were all kind of all in and really helped. And it was, it's been a really interesting experience. I published it one day. It's easily the best-selling book I have ever published. I mean, it's going crazy in the marketplace right now. And I think people are kind of hungry to hear about what these guys' thoughts are. And you can get them by reading their papers. These academic papers, forgive me.
I beg to differ.
Yeah,
Go on.
these academic papers, they really aren't written to be read. They're written for a very narrow audience, and they're written not to give pleasure or to engage or excite. They're written to survive. They're written by someone just hoping not to get caught in a mistake. So the ideas aren't really accessible there. And Danny doesn't really tell their story in his book. And if the emotions of the relationship somehow electrify the ideas, and you can see people like just surprise me. My mother, reading the book. My mother's never read any of my books, and she's really actually interested in this story. So I'm serious. She's never read any of my books, and it's not a joke. It's sad. Because all of them at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I hope my mother understands this. And in this case, she's actually really interested in it. So it's been interesting to see just how hungry the world is for them. And my thought when I was writing it was, you want to explain heuristics, and you want to explain everybody in this room probably has been exposed to these ideas one way or the other. Prospect theory. Some of their ideas didn't really ever get out there because they didn't quite finish them. And I was able to kind of toss those in the book as well. But the actual way, what I want the reader actually to come away with, was a really vivid image in their minds of Amos and Danny's minds, of Amos and Danny's characters, so that they do what, even though I never met Amos Tversky, when faced with a decision or a judgment or a situation, I can now ask myself, what would Amos think? And get a more interesting answer than I would supply on my own. So that was the goal, was kind of put these characters, create these characters in such a way that they became characters in the imaginations of the reader.
It's fascinating. It raises a lot of questions for me, but I guess the place that you started was, that you wrote this book because of a bunch of academics. So for anyone who thinks that the ivory tower doesn't matter, academics can cause Michael Lewis to write a book. That's impossible.
Well, these guys, that's absolutely true. Ideas can have incredible power. But this is a peculiar case because they were Israeli academics in that period. And so they weren't allowed to just sit in school. And they weren't allowed to get all their status from the Hebrew University. They were shooting and getting shot at every 6 years. They were in and out of their reserve duty in the military. They were actively engaged in society in all kinds of ways, and they had it wasn't exactly an obligation, but there was an impulse to be useful. So Danny Kahneman, who had World War II never happened, and he was allowed to live his natural life in France, he would have been in this ethereal French intellectual, who I'm sure would not have get engaged with the outside world very much. He would have been a high-status French intellectual who knew other intellectuals. This guy ends up redesigning the Israeli military, training Israeli fighter pilots, training tank commanders, figuring out what should be put in the meals ready to eat box for the soldiers in the middle of a war. I mean, running around the battlefield with Amos in a Jeep. Israel forced Danny to be useful, and he ended up being very quickly, at a very young age, once forced to be useful, realized how fantastically useful he could be. So all of a sudden, his psychology class in school is called Applications of Psychology, and it's all about how you solve a problem, a practical problem. So that informs their work. More Danny than Amos, oddly, because Amos actually was a creature of man of the world. He was out there. The life of every party. He was socially much more interactive than Danny. But Amos's academic work would have been, without Danny, I think, far removed from earthly concerns.
So talk to us about the collaboration. I think everybody who's here with us is at some point hoping to have a collaboration like that, where you find one person you work with who makes you way better than you were alone. What did you learn from unpacking that relationship about great dynamic duos?
Well, in that, I don't know how much of it is generalizable, but I can tell you what I learned about them. The first thing, the key, I think, to just how instantly integrated they became. So as Danny says, we shared a mind. They found very quickly in each other something they lacked in themselves that they really hungered for. Amos Tversky, who famously was the smartest man anybody ever met, without making a big deal about it, which is annoying. Dick Nisbet, a psychologist at Michigan, designed this one-line intelligence test.
The Tversky test.
The Tversky test. The longer it takes you after you've met Amos to figure out that Amos is smarter than you, the stupider you are. And everybody just agreed. I mean, there are 100 stories. There are 100 stories like the following. Amos goes to a party with some of the greatest physicists in the world in Tel Aviv. It's to honor the recipient of a big physics prize in Israel, a young physicist. The young physicist ends up in the corner with Amos. The next day, the young physicist calls the hostess of the party and says, "Who was that physicist I was talking to?" And she doesn't know who he's talking about because he's given this physical description. And she goes, "Oh, you mean Amos Tversky? He's not a physicist, he's a psychologist." And like dead silence on the end of the line, then that can't be true. He was the smartest physicist there. And that kind of thing happens over and over, and you think, how? And he was just like, and the things that came out of his mouth were just like fantastic. So Amos, as smart as he is, lacks something. And what he lacks is in somewhere where the power what he was a logician. What he wanted to be was a poet. And when he was a kid, he struck up a friendship, odd friendships with people who were poetic geniuses. He was drawn to it. He wanted to write it. He did write it, but it wasn't any good. His imagination was kind of ordinary, and so he has that going on. Danny is a poet. He's got a novelistic imagination. He's got such a vivid fantasy life while he's being chased by Nazis through France at age 7, 8, 9, 10. He realizes this when he's a little boy, that he has to be careful what he fantasizes about because the feeling is so vivid that it's as if it happened. So he cannot allow himself to imagine, and he takes this into adulthood, fantasize about something he actually wants, because if he fantasizes himself having it, he loses his motivation to get it because he's felt like he's already had it. And so he creates rules for his own imagination because he's not bragging about this. He's just kind of throwing this out as, oh, this is just this weird thing about me. And Danny, for I think complicated reasons, but for whatever reason, decides that he has to be a scientist at a very early age. But Danny's mind is disorganized. Like Danny's office is disorganized. So messy that the secretary ties his scissors to the chair because he can't find anything in the place. And he's this welter of like insight and doubt. The minute he has a thought, however great it is, you can be sure he's going to turn on it. Now, there's a lot going on there. I think part of what's going on there is Danny really doesn't like to have to fight. Which means he doesn't like to have to defend any of his ideas. So if he turns on them first, nobody else, he beats everybody to it. That you can never get it. He's totally elusive. You say, he tells you a great idea, you find what's wrong with it, he says, I already thought of that. And that's Danny. And so very, very unsure of himself, deeply pessimistic. Amos is the most confident man who ever walked the earth and a great optimist. He's a theoretical optimist. He's got principled optimist, rather. He says pessimism is stupid. If you're a pessimist, he tells Danny, you live it twice. You live it when you're imagining the bad thing happening, and then you live it when it happens. So why be a pessimist? Danny is intoxicated by the optimism, the certitude, and the sense that if Amos thinks my idea is good, it's good. And that this is the smartest man on the planet. He creates a safe space for Danny to have his ideas, and and Danny gets the certainty and the confidence from him. And Amos gets this rich, incredible trove of ideas that just keep coming. And that's a little simplistic. Amos was plenty capable of like having some insights himself, but I think that was kind of what was going on in the room. Now, what's curious about the thing, and reinforces this theory of the relationship, is that it was only in the room. that Danny would say, and everybody would kind of agree, that they seemed to be different people when they were together and alone when they were out in public. Bad things happened when the outside world was with them. When they had to take their relationship public, it was a problem. And so the relationship worked so long as they were in a room together, and not so much if they were trying to teach a class together, or if they were given a talk, a public talk together, whatever it was. So they changed slightly in each other's presence in ways they really liked. So they kind of liked who they were when they were with each other, and it was different from who they were when they were with other people. So I think that was kind of critical to the relationship.
Sounds like a Seinfeld episode. You're killing Independent George. Don't mess with this relationship. But it makes me wonder about the effect that this has had on you and your work. So you learned about all these heuristics and biases, which you had seen in your financial and sports journalism, but maybe not labeled or understood their basis in psychology. You now have the question of how do you live differently knowing all this information? And I remember asking Danny once, you won a Nobel Prize, you study decision making, you've changed the way we see it. How do you make your hardest decisions? And Danny's answer is, I assign on a coin, I assign heads to one option, tails to the other. I flip the coin, and then I observe my own emotional reaction, and if I don't like it, I flip it again. That's not helpful. So the question is, what have you learned about decision making from doing a deep dive into their work?
Not to emulate Danny. There's two answers to this question. One is nothing in some ways, in that one of the points they both were pretty fatalistic about the possibility. Once they've identified these cognitive illusions, they show the way the mind can be tricked. They draw the analogy to optical illusions, and they think the analogy is pretty good. And that if you and I are driving down the highway in the desert and we see water on the highway in the distance, even when someone tells us that's just a mirage, we still see the water on the highway. That we can know it's a mirage, but we can't. We still see the optic. We're still tricked. Our eyes are still tricked. I think they thought that's the mind, it was very hard to detect and correct your own cognitive biases. Having said that, I think Amos in particular, but maybe Danny too to some extent, though the problem with Danny, it's hard to get really straight answers because part of what's going on there is that if you make him say, here are your rules for life, he instantly starts thinking about how it's going to be attacked by someone. You're forcing him to make a positive declaration statement that might be defended. Amos would say, I think, because he did say to people often who came to him for advice, it may be hard to detect your own cognitive biases, but it's not so hard to detect other people's. So be very sensitive to the environment in which you make the decision, and make sure there are checks in that environment. So for example, this is, again, one of dozens of examples of people coming to Amos, but in the mid-'80s, or late '80s, Delta Airlines was having problems with its pilots. They noticed that there was judgmental error in the cockpit, and there were several weird episodes that happened back to back to back, like a plane bound for Miami that was supposed to land in Miami landed in Fort Lauderdale instead. Pilots were landing in the wrong airports. They thought we had a problem. They had a problem in a cognitive problem in the cockpit, and they had the guy who ran the 6,000 person Delta Airlines pilot training program didn't know where to turn, and someone pointed him to Amos, and he had to spend an afternoon with Amos, and that afternoon changed the way Delta Airlines trained pilots, and then Delta changed the way everybody else trained pilots. And what Amos said was this. And I talked to this guy. He said, and it was unbelievable. I talked to this guy. He spent one afternoon with Amos. When I called him 25 years later, he says, Amos Tversky, smartest man I ever met. This guy's now retired in Cape Cod. He said, I've never met anybody like that. And he said, we sat down, and he said, tell me how the cockpit works. And they explained that the cockpit then was an autocratic environment. The captain was this god, and people were really discouraged from questioning his judgment. And Amos said, well, what you've got to do is create a more egalitarian environment in the cockpit so that the co-pilots, whoever's there, if they can be looking for the mistakes that the captain makes. He said, we completely changed in response to this the culture of the cockpit. We got gone with the autocratic pilot. And he said we haven't had Delta hasn't had these problems since. So he was that was quite an affirmation of Danny and Amos's practical, the ability of someone to take their the spirit of their work and apply it. But it is tricky. In my own life, I guess the closest thing I do think, what I do is what I said before. I've started to think, I do think now, kind of like, what would Amos say? What would Danny say? How would they see this problem? They made me alive to how I was actually already doing it. Like there's a whole throwaway section in the book because they throw it away, where for a while they're noodling on what's this problem called Allay's paradox. I don't want to have to explain it. It's algebra, but Danny's looking at Allay's paradox, which no one can solve. And he says, well, this is an easy paradox to solve. The reason that people are switching preferences here is that the way they make these decisions is they anticipate regret. And the idea that making a decision that anticipating regret shapes the decision in advance. That you're kind of thinking, how are you going to feel after? This is kind of what we're talking about with the coin flip. And that could actually cause you to do things. It's being aware that you're making decisions that way. And Amos had a trick I've used in just ordinary life situations where he did say, I try to imagine what I'm going to regret after I've done the X versus Y, and then I see what I feel worse about. So he made the decision. He was given instantly when he went on the job market when they left Israel. Within a few hours, Stanford offered him a tenured position, and Harvard wrote a quick fax and said, come here. And he was choosing between Harvard and Stanford, and he said, I thought about what am I going to regret when I'm there? He said, at Harvard, I'm going to regret every day the crappy weather, the crappy housing that's a long way from the school, the commute, and at Stanford, I'm going to regret not being able to say I teach at Harvard, and that's going to go away very quickly. And he went to Stanford. So the kind of tricks of tricky ways to think about decisions that they sort of suggest, but the short answer is that they had no huge systematic effect on the way I go through my life. It's just more interesting because of it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit more about you. One of the things that I've been up to this week is making a few calls and emails to people who have described you as a friend or a colleague, and trying to get a sense of what are the most important things that we could learn from you, given the volume of amazing work that you've done. So the first person was Malcolm Gladwell, who says he lives in constant awe of your ability to write, and you're the person he most wants to be when he grows up.
So Malcolm has a strategy. It's called love bomb. When he wants to destroy you, he says nice things about you. And Malcolm is a vast talent who there's absolutely no way he lives in awe of me. But that's very nice he says it.
He stands by it. And so I said, what should I ask Michael? And Malcolm says, well, he wrote a book about psychology, so you have to ask him about his mother.
So I've already told him about my mother. She doesn't read my books.
but I'm interested in the depth of that question, which is we all admire your ability to tell stories and bring characters to life, and I'm curious about how you've honed that skill over time and what we can all learn from that.
You're not asking me about my mother.
No, you don't have to answer about your mother.
All right, because then my mother's a good subject.
If you want to talk about your mother, we can go there.
That's all right. So I was thinking about my mother.
What I'm really curious about, what I would love to understand, and I think a lot of people in the audience want to understand too, is you have a remarkable gift for telling stories and bringing characters and events to life. And that's something that we all have to do when we explain our own stories, when we try to pitch ideas to other people. And I'm wondering how you hone this craft of storytelling.
I didn't think of it as honing a craft. I did think of it as a craft. That's not fair. I didn't think. I'm not thinking I'm getting better and better. Each story has its own, makes its own demands on you. So rule number one, when you go through life, this is Amos says this, interesting things happen to people who can tell interesting stories about them. So just developing a narrative impulse about your own life is incredibly enriching. Incredibly enriching. Most people don't. Most people walk through the world and they don't see the story of their life. This is the arbitrage I do. Billy Beane didn't see a story in his life. Danny didn't see a story in his life. Even Danny. Danny, I had to say to Danny, he said, why is anybody going to read this book? That's what he said. Like, who's going to be interested? And I said, the reason you were such a good character is you don't know you're a good character. But if you are watched properly, if you are observed closely, you are a very good character. And a lot of people are good characters if they're watched closely. So watch. That's like rule number 2. If you want to tell good stories about just your own life, observe it. Observe what's around you. Take time. Back off it a little bit. Have some detachment about it. Another Amosism. People waste years of their lives because they are unwilling to waste hours of their day. They think that important people are busy, so if they're busy, they must be important. That's not a good strategy of life. It's good not to be too busy. You can't be really, really busy all the time and notice the things that lead to stories. So back off. That's rule number 2. Rule number 3: pay attention to the way you tell the story of your own life. We're starting with just yourself as material in your life. It's a good way to start with storytelling. If the stories you tell of your own life, in these stories you are always the victim, or something always bad is always happening to you, you might notice. If you notice the stories, you start to notice patterns in the stories. I found the happiest people and the best storytellers often find gratitude in life. That they notice how lucky they are, because they often, you can find your good fortune if you look for it. Everybody in this room has good fortune. So that's ground level. Once you set about trying to tell stories about other people, some other rules. Admit contradictory evidence. So the cheap storytelling is cheap pattern recognition. And the story, if there's something that violates the pattern, often if you incorporate it into the story, it makes the story even richer. It's in the first blush uncomfortable, because you had this neat story. Sometimes the better stories are a little messier. So don't be afraid to see the complexity in stories. Not every story is. They're going to be. Ask yourself the question always: can I think of counterexamples that suggest my story is false? Because it will just enrich the story. In my own writing, for a story to rise to the level where I want to tell it in print, it's got to have a bunch of ingredients that a normal story of, anecdotes about your life don't necessarily have to have. Although the ability to tell the anecdote about your life is woven into it is almost a requirement to tell the story in the first place. But it's got to have a character who interests people, who they want to follow, someone they want to follow, someone who interests them. Because it's amazing if you create a character who the reader will follow, where they will follow him. It is amazing that they will learn about a collateralized debt obligation if they get interested in Steve Eisman or Michael Burry. They will learn about Allay's paradox if they get interested in Amos and Danny. They will learn about baseball statistics, even if they don't have no interest in baseball, if they're interested in Billy Beane or Scott Hatterberg or Chad Bradford. So the presence of a character is very, very useful. And be very alive to the situation in which the character finds themselves. So that's, for me, it's a character. All these books start with, not with it's not necessarily like I'm looking for disruptive people or any of that stuff. I'm looking for character in a situation that I find interesting. And so that's the last big thing. It's like the level of interest you feel in the story you're telling. If you're telling a story just to sell something, and you're not actually interested in the story, that will quickly become apparent to the people who are listening, at some level. They may only hear those kind of stories, so they don't really notice it. But if you are actually very, very yourself interested in the story and see some important meaning in it, people want that, and they will listen. So the test for me before a magazine piece becomes a book or a bit of research becomes a book is I always have a feeling, and the feeling is this story is so important that I actually have an obligation to it. That it isn't. I'm not. That I'm doing. It's a kind of sense of duty to the story, and I've been so lucky to be handed this, to be in a situation where I've been gifted this material. I now have the job of not screwing it up in print, and that's the spirit with which I go into every book, because you got to have that. I've got to have that because it gets miserable in the middle of it when you do it. They're a pain in the ass to do, and you have to realize there's some higher obligation behind this. And if I have that to start, it carries me through the end. Now, I'm not saying that every little story you tell has to have that, but with a big endeavor like this, I find that's very useful.
There's a follow-up on that. Another person who weighed in on you is Sheryl Sandberg.
You have very fancy friends. I'm glad you didn't call my mother, because she's actually excited.
We'll save that for the follow-up rounds. Sheryl and I just finished writing a book together, Option B on resilience, and one of the most frustrating parts of that writing process was every time we produced a draft, we would say, is this Michael Lewis level? And we would say no and throw it away and start over. And so we were eager to know, is there a process you can recommend for perfecting the language, the poetic nature of your writing, the way that the story moves?
I don't think in terms of perfection, as many of my reviewers have pointed out. I don't, that it's not, what I think is alive. Is it alive on the page? Is it like jumping off the page? Am I, when I pick it up in different moods, in different points of the day, in different fonts even, am I having a kind of, wow, that's kind of interesting, it's fresh. So that's what I do when I'm editing. I try to edit on paper, on a phone. I'll look at it on my phone. I'll look at it on my computer screen, because each time you see it a little differently. I get a typeset so that it looks like an actual book, and that really helps. I'll have a couple of glasses of wine and then read it. That really helps, because I'm completely impatient, and I know the just different states of mind, and is it alive when you're kind of seeing it, trying to see it fresh. So that's and I'm trying to think of the equivalent I would do. What I don't do is what you just did. I'm not comparing myself to someone else, because I can't be someone else. I can just be me. And the goal is to be the best me, not the worst me. And I think voices on the page, this is going to be depressing advice, because I'm not sure you can teach voice. That people have voices or they don't a lot of times. I've never really seen anybody learn a voice, but at the very least, not trying to sound like someone else, just being sounding like yourself, has a huge effect on a reader. They feel like they're being spoken to, and that's just refreshing. So I would stop reading my stuff and comparing it, because it's just going to be different anyway, right? And so I give you that advice.
So I'm with you there, but I think that sometimes you want to create a similar feeling in the reader, right? So if you talk about how your book brings a character to life, or the way that a story moves, right? You can learn things from other writers, presumably.
That indirectly that way, but be really careful about it, like imitative prose. Or even thinking, like there's this. It's hard to take stuff from other people as a writer. Having the nerve to be yourself is very valuable. Even if you don't naturally have a strong literary voice, just not trying to sound like someone else. If Sheryl didn't need much help. Her voice it's not exactly a literary voice, but it goes very well with the lean in, the book Lean In. Her voice goes very well with that message. It sounds like her talking. That annoys some people, but it really works. And she gave it to me in draft form, and I thought, this is great. I mean, it sounds like Cheryl bossing me around, and she's good at it.
That's because she's demonstrating her executive leadership skills.
Yeah, that is the problem. You know that when Cheryl was 8, if you were 8 and you were in the sandbox with her, that you would just be a pawn in the game of her creation. That you'd be assigned to build that little part of the castle, and she does just take control of situations.
Who has fancy friends now at age 8?
So that, I don't know how helpful that advice is, but I don't. When I was really young, when I was a 20-year-old writer, there were writers I would hand to. If some kid came to me and said, "Give me stuff to read you think will help shape me into a better writer," I would hand them things like, I don't know, George Orwell's journalism and essays, prose that illustrates the power of just simple clarity. I think that's kind of the best lesson you can teach a writer. Just try to figure out what you're trying to say, and don't overtax the reader with how you say it. Don't get in the way. Get out of the way. Find, when there's a simple word, use a simple word rather than the complicated word. Don't clutter up with lots of dumb metaphors. Just be very careful about editing yourself. I mean, maybe that's the big thing. Is that you want the reader to feel like you're not wasting his time, and you thought a lot about that.
So let's. I know there are a lot of sports fans in the room. There are also a lot of people who have thought carefully about what a finance career looks like. I want to talk about each of those worlds since you've done such deep dives into them. Let's start with sports. So, what do you think the whole response to Moneyball is getting wrong, and what would you say to all the people who are trying to adopt it?
Well, the response at first was hostile. I mean, now it's not. Now it's kind of the war, at least in baseball, is over. But the war, it's not in sports anymore. You want to see the kind of the cutting edge of the Moneyball argument is with this last election, and the backlash against Nate Silver for not having predicted Donald Trump was going to win the presidency. I find this moronic because, in fact, if you go back and read the 538 blog and their probability estimations of they were given the data they had, which is all you got, the polls. They did a really, really good job, the best job of anybody as far as I can tell, at kind of saying what might happen. That there's a chance this guy was going to win. These were the conditions in which he would win. There was a chance there would be some systematic polling error, and that wouldn't take that much in a few states to flip it. And everybody should acknowledge this is a closer race than Hillary's going to win. And yeah, the takeaway, I got into this with Joe Scarborough on television a couple of days ago. He's like, "Oh, it shows all those geeks are just stupid." And I'm sorry, but I don't remember you saying with great certainty that Donald Trump's going to win and why. It's as if Nate Silver is held to the standard. If he can't predict exactly the future, then he must be full of it. But everybody who's just flying by the seat of their pants, they can make it up as they go along, and no one holds them to anything they ever say. And so it's odd, this double standard. And that's the people who feel threatened by analytics, and they come in many forms. But if you want to generalize about them, they're experts. The expert political pundits on TV, or the expert scouts, the baseball scouts, or even doctors. I mean, the people who predict things, financial advisors, people whose job it is to make firm predictions when actually what they should say is this is a probabilistic matter and you can't make predictions. You should just accept that you're going to be wrong 30% of the time, so on and so forth. Those people are threatened, and whenever they have a chance to say, "Oh, look, they didn't get it either. They didn't get it," they do. And I'm not sure it's fooling anybody though. I mean, there's noise in the air, but I'm not sure it's fooling anybody. So that's the the beginning of my book, of this book, it's the first 30 pages or so are set in the front office of the Houston Rockets, because that's where the interesting arguments are happening, where you've got a culture that completely understands the value of the analytics, completely understands what it means to be in an uncertain world where the best you can do is kind of assess probabilities, completely understands that you're never, ever going to be able to pick the high school kid or the college freshman who is going to be the NBA superstar. And you're going to make type 1 errors and type 2 errors no matter what you do. So this is Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, who goes in with a Moneyball mindset, fully embraced by the elite, that we're going to make our decisions by algorithm, and pretty quickly sees that because the outcomes are not always going to be perfect, and because there's information that's not in the algorithm you would like to be in the algorithm, like, did the player get hit by a bus the day before the draft, or is he using cocaine all of a sudden, or whatever, that you need, the analytics they work organically with human judgment. And then the question is how you do it. And that's where it gets interesting, because here Daryl Morey, who really didn't know anything about Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, or not much about behavioral economics, realizes that if he's going to have the judgment reintroduced to the process, he's also reintroducing all the potential problems with the judgment. So he has to tell the scouts, yeah, okay, we're going to have them in to interview them, the players, before we draft them, or we'll have them in to shoot for us and scrimmage for us.
But don't pay too much attention
Don't pay too much attention to it, right. So if the young Steph Curry, coming out of Davidson, comes in, and as he's warming up, he misses 6 straight three-point shots, don't decide he's a crappy three-point shooter. We have a body of evidence that tells us what kind of three-point shooter he is. But they say he's the scout. It drives the scouts crazy. They kind of say, if you don't want me to care so much about it, don't show it to me. I don't want to see it. So they wrestle with like how to watch themselves, even as they're trying to get incremental information that might be valuable. They wrestle on not to be deceived during an interview, but it's really, really hard. So I think that that's where the fun is and where the interest is with people who aren't sitting there waiting to say, oh, the analytics are all bullshit. It's, yes, this is very valuable. We're trying to marry two things, and how you marry it is a very subtle and complicated thing. We need to do it in the spirit of a collaborative spirit where nobody's saying one way is better than the other way, all that. And that's, but it's amazing. You watch an NBA front office try to make that high-priced decision of who you're going to draft. You're going to have millions of dollars at stake. And the whole world is conspiring to prey on Kahneman, Tversky-like weaknesses of mind, on the weaknesses they identified. So when I was there, 10 years ago, a 6'1" or 2" light-skinned player from Davidson College who happened to be able to shoot the 3-ball pretty well would have been just laughed at as a top prospect for an NBA team. This guy comes in and he lights up the league, and all of a sudden there are replicas of Steph Curry, physical replicas showing up saying, I'm the next Steph Curry. Tyler Harper, guard at Eastern Washington, looks exactly like him. There's no way he's going to be an NBA player, and he fools people into drafting him because he looks like Steph Curry, and he has kind of the same game. And these guys, the agents almost figure out that, people think in stereotypes. There's this matching process that goes on. We have a new stereotype of what a superstar NBA guard looks like. Find someone that actually looks like him, and you'll fool people into drafting him. I mean, it's not as crude as that, but that kind of thing is going on. And so they have to sit there and defend themselves against, God, the guy really does look like us. He kind of moves in the practice drills kind of like Steph Curry, but he's not Steph Curry. And the opposite was the Jeremy Lin story. It's an unbelievable story where, as Daryl said, nobody drafts Jeremy Lin. Nobody wants Jeremy Lin, the great. Does everybody know who Jeremy Lin is here, right? All right. Well, so Jeremy Lin, the guard who explodes on the scene in Madison Square Garden and has established himself as a very, very good NBA player. Nobody wants him out of high school. No colleges want him out of high school. He doesn't get a scholarship offer to Harvard, which doesn't count. And I mean, he's playing across the street from Stanford, and the Stanford coach has no interest. Coming out of Harvard, nobody wants to draft him. And Darryl said the reason was everybody looked at him and said he's not athletic. Now, after the draft, the analytics get better and better in basketball. They now put kind of like, they wire these guys up with electrodes and have them measure the speed of their first step and how quickly they come off the court, and how you know, they're measuring crazy things about these players to try to kind of quantify athleticism. And when they did this with Jeremy Lin, he was off the charts athletic, like crazy athletic. The fastest first two steps they ever measured. And Darryl says, why were we all blind to it? It's because we saw Asian. We saw an Asian kid, and no one had seen an Asian kid that size who was athletic. So it wasn't that they were racist. It was that they, in their minds, they had this like a stereotype of what an athletic kid looked like, and they hadn't seen that before, and they're just blind to it. This is where the fun is. It's with guys who have the grounding, the understanding of the value of the analytics, who are wrestling with like what's the incremental value you can get out of intuitive judgment without screwing up your whole decision-making process.
And so you're running a team like the Rockets. You're not just going to shift from one prototype to another. You're going to have some way of incorporating that analytics and then still using human judgment. What does that look like?
It looks like them. It looks like that chapter in the book where everyone in the room is educated about it all. They kind of, and so that no one feels threatened by the analytics. I tell you what it looks like. It looks like a far more uncertain process than the old process, where everybody had a beer together and said, "You're going to draft this guy, and he's great, we know." There's a lot of that, and everybody in the room says, we're going to draft him, but we know we can be wrong. Everybody has a sense of their own fallibility. This is the central message of Danny and Amos. It's like, fallibility is not a shameful thing. We are kind of constructed to make certain kinds of mistakes. And the trick is acknowledging that, not hiding or regarding it as a shameful thing. So that spirit, when you're sitting in the draft room of the Houston Rockets, they all have this sense like, look, I know this might be wrong. I know just hear me out, I know this might be wrong. And when they collectively make a decision, they hope for the best. They're not looking to point fingers. It's almost as much the kind of culture of the company around the decision. They're looking to get blame on the people if the decision's wrong, if the process was right. Now, you're always looking to improve the process, but you're judging yourself on the process rather than the outcome, because the outcome you can't control.
That's a nice segue to the finance question. So we have a lot of people in the room who one day will be shaping markets. If you could give one piece of advice based on your own experience and Flash Boys and all the time you spent thinking about this, what would you say?
Well, when you say shaping markets, what does that mean?
I don't know, it's your question to answer.
Yeah.
No, what do you want it to mean?
It sounds like it's my question to ask.
So future bank leaders, future regulators, if you think about the different roles people can
it's
have.
really simple. I wrote Flash Boys is the last thing I'm going to write on Wall Street, I think. I've said this before twice, though. But reintroducing a sense of morality to finance, it sounds naive, like, oh yeah, right. People who are on Wall Street are going to be good guys, are going to actually care about like their social responsibility and all that. This is what has to happen, because you're essentially you're an elite. Now, I think part of the problem with what's wrong with Wall Street is that the sense of noblesse oblige in an elite that just kind of walked on without any particular qualifications. It was just a social position. Got replaced by a pretty brutal meritocracy. So if you got there, you thought, I deserve being here, I'm gonna get what I can get. And this is where smart people get paid, and I'm gonna get paid and all that. And I'm gonna game the system. If it's legal, it's okay. This is awful. I mean, what has to happen is you have to, when you're doing what you do with your career, not just ask, is it legal or is it illegal? You gotta ask, is it right or is it wrong? And this is what I loved about Brad Katsuyama. It's a natural thing to do, and many people do it in other walks of life. It is not impossible that this could happen on Wall Street, and it is happening on Wall Street. And you see with IEX, the exchange Katsuyama created, the minute he created an environment that had that purpose, like we don't want to just do well, we want to do good. We want to create a level playing field in the market. We want to fix problems. We are willing to be very, very long-term greedy rather than short-term greedy. And we were even sometimes maybe not willing not to be greedy at all. It attracted so many interesting, good people. The people are hungry for this. They had, I don't know, they have dozens of applicants for every opening. And so it's not as if people don't want this. People want purpose in their life beyond just making money. I know so many people who made a lot of money on Wall Street who are just unhappy sons of bitches. And then they try to use the fact they made the money to cover up their unhappiness and as a kind of like a reason for their existence. And that's just a horrible way to go through life. So I would think in that environment, you should be working very hard to resist the temptation just to make it all about money. And that if you do that, it may lead you interesting and innovative places because not everybody's doing it. It's a slightly original approach to finance.
So building on that, I've spent a lot of my career studying the differences between givers and takers. And you had a person in your life, John Kenny.
That's funny that you saw that. That was a
same language, same idea.
The givers and the takers. So I went to a tennis camp in New Hampshire. I grew up in New Orleans. But I had a really good friend in New Orleans whose mom was from Boston and who knew this tennis camp up in northern New Hampshire. Mainly famous because it's where Bodie Miller came from, the skier. Bodie was he was basically raised as an animal in the wild. He lived in a treehouse. He never wore any clothes. I remember as a little kid, like crawling around with mud all over, and never without any clothes on ever. And this camp, Tamarack, you got there, and that was exotic going up to New Hampshire for camp. I get to this camp, and there are like 60 kids in the camp. And the guy who ran the camp was named Jack Kenny, and was this kind of great character. He'd been a professional tennis player. He'd played the only professional tennis tournament on ice. And his doubles partner was Fred Perry. The guy used to have the line of clothes. And Jack had retired to the New Hampshire wilds in a very kind of Thoreauvian manner. Thoreau and Emerson were in the air. It was like American transcendentalism meets tennis. And the cabins are so crappy that mothers, when they dropped their kids off, would weep as they left. There was no mosquito netting and never passed code. It was just like, there were a lot of kids from pretty well-heeled families there, and they were living in essentially poverty in the woods. And the food was unbelievably bad. And so what happens, what he would do, but what it was actually was one giant moral education. And he let the kids kind of do what they did for the first couple of days. You'd come to breakfast every morning, and there'd be a round table, and you'd sit at the table with other people, and in the middle of the table was a cereal. And the cereal, there'd always be like 3 Fruit Loops and 3 Cheerios, and then there'd be for 8 people, then there'd be 1 Raisin Bran and 1 Constipation cereal, which nobody wanted the Constipation cereal. It was like this gross bran stuff. And so people saw that the first day, and the second day, kids are like bolting to breakfast to get the Fruit Loops before everybody else. So you leave the kid who's last to get the Constipation cereal. And so the third day, Jack Kenny gets up in front of the kids, and he comes out and he gives this speech. He's kind of old then, and he closes his eyes and he says, he talks about the givers and the takers in the world. It's the givers and the takers speech. He did it at every camp. He said, you come from big cities, probably most of you, and you see people walking down the streets, and there are these little sucks of care going into their job, where they take. And he describes, that how without joy that is, how much joy there is in giving. And you're thinking, yeah, but you're listening about a story about these grown-ups on the streets of city streets of America. And then he goes, you can see it here in the breakfast room. In the morning, when you see kids running to get the cereal they want, and leaving behind for the kid who happens to be the slowest, the cereal nobody wants. And everybody goes, me, oh, you know, and everybody has this pit in their stomach. And from then on, the environment becomes, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be the taker. The next day, everybody's kind of slow walking it to the breakfast. And so I'll take that. I'll eat it. You know, falling on the hand grenade. And it really is one of those distinctions in the world. It's a very useful one to make when you're evaluating people and your own behavior. Like some people are givers and some people are takers. Some people go through life in one way, and some people go. And most of us are one or the other, depending on the environment we're in, the circumstances, and so on and so forth. But it's a nice thing to keep in your mind.
Well, Michael, in closing, I want to say a couple things. The first one is that my favorite comment about you, which I will not attribute, was I have an entire book club of people who don't read books except we read Michael Lewis. And I thought that was about the highest praise that you could give to someone.
Or very damning.
Well, yeah, it goes either way. But I took it positively, and I think you've opened so many people's eyes to the way that the world works, and really helped us make sense of not only the systems we're part of, but what part we want to have in them. And it's been a real treat to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.